with her. I mean, Republicans have not foregrounded women in these kinds of speeches, so it is an accomplishment for them to have done that with Cathy McMorris Rodgers. Is it also strategic to have moved on those anti-reproductive rights issues on the day of the State of the Union? Do they think that's part of the appeal?
Look, it is an appeal to segments of the Republican base. What I would say on the contraception issues for a limited government party, certainly there are vast sections of the Republican Party, including Republican women, who just don't believe that the federal government should have a say in their contraception issues. Now, on the issue...
But on, like, because they don't want insurance regulation that says you have to cover anything? I mean, they're not saying we don't want, you know, blood pressure medication to be mandated to be covered if you work at in terms of what insurance you're getting. They're focusing on contraception specifically.
They don't want to hear politicians talking about limiting access in any way to contraception. They don't view that as the province of a party that's supposed to be the limited government party. And this issue is not a winning issue for the Republican Party. This was a disaster issue in the 2012 election. So when you look at all the polling data that's out there right now, you know, certainly it is the case that there is great concern with the health care law. There's great concern with the economy, even though statistically the economy is improving. There's no evidence to suggest that the issues that the House was focused on today have much currency in the middle of the electorate or are going to be appealing broadly to bring people into the party. And if you look at where the Republican Party is, disapproval of party is by a ratio of almost 2 to 1. And so that is the sign of a very unhealthy political party. You know, the fact that the president is in the 40s from an approval level is not a sign of strength for the Republican Party. It's a sign of weakness for the president. That's totally different from the Republican Party doing well. And even though Republicans may well be in the position to take control of the Senate, that's a function of the geography of the races and the individual candidates, not the strength of the party.
Well, I want to bring in now Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar. Senator Klobuchar, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Well, thanks, Rachel.
Let me ask you specifically about the minimum wage. The president asked CEOs to raise their workers' wages unilaterally. He said that mayors and governors and state legislators should work on it. But then he said, yes, Congress should do it too. John Boehner has said essentially that any hike in the minimum wage is dead on arrival. Do you see any path for getting a raise in the federal minimum wage this year?
Well, I think it's going to be a long haul, but you did see a lot of interest in this. And do note that the company they mentioned as the example was Punch Pizza from Minneapolis, Minnesota, that the president raised. I was the only one to stand in the entire chamber to cheer them on. But it's an example of a company. I met the cook, Nick, who is in my office, and the CEO, Jim, today. They just made that decision that it would be better for them competitively. And we have seen throughout American history when the minimum wage goes up, our economy moves ahead, it moves forward, and we cannot have a strong economy when 70% of our economy is consumer-based, and it's hard for people to buy stuff. As Paul Wellstone always used to say, we all do better when we all do better, and that's where we're falling behind. So I thought that was a good part of the president's speech, and I would note what you guys have been talking about, that one of the more surprising moments was when he talked about that we're not living in a madman episode, and that suddenly, by the way, it wasn't just Democrats, but when he said we should have equal pay for equal work and not be making 70 cents on a dollar, Republicans en masse were standing up and cheering. So I just want to make sure that their vote is where their applause line is, and that they vote for us and with us on the Paycheck Fairness Act.
At the start of this Congress, one of the things that you and I talked about on my show was that there are, historically speaking, a lot of women senators right now, and you talked about how there's a bipartisan sense among women in the Senate, and that women in the Senate can maybe talk to each other in ways that conversations aren't happening more broadly. Has that been sustained into this second year of this Congress? Are women senators, Republicans and Democrats, still talking to each other outside of formal lines?
Yes, it's very strong. In fact, when you look at the group that was working during the shutdown, I was in that group, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Kelly Ayotte, Jean Shaheen, Heidi Heitkamp. Half of that group was women, and it made a major difference in working with the leadership on both sides to end that shutdown. Then you go into what happened last night. Debbie Stabenow negotiated the farm bill. Barbara Mikulski and Patty Murray led the way on the budget in the Senate. The women are really able to work not just with each other, but also with their Republican colleagues. So I think the sense you felt felt in that chamber and the excitement was about the wage issues. It was about women feeling like they're working really hard and they need to get paid, but was also about the rise of not just numbers, but the power of women in that chamber. And I thought it was a really unexpected and exciting moment.
Senator, the president also addressed the problem of voting rights. He talked about how the Voting Rights Act was weakened last year, and he talked about how, as a democracy, that we need to not make it where people have to spend hours online to vote. There's a bipartisan bill that Mr. Sensenbrenner and John Lewis have proposed. Do you sense his comments tonight will help in the Congress to get more support, bipartisan support, since it is a bipartisan bill dealing with voting rights and that specific issue?
Yes, I do, and I think that that was a very good sign that people came together on some kind of an agreement. I'm on the Judiciary Committee. We want to move this bill. I'm looking right across here at the Statutory Hall and see John Lewis, who you know just this year, 48 years after that march on Selma, that white Montgomery police chief, you were there, handed that badge to apologize to Congressman Lewis. Change takes time, but we cannot let the Voting Rights Act remain dormant. It is time to get it done, and I'm glad that there's some bipartisan support, and I think it would be a big embarrassment. I sat next to Jeff Sessions, a conservative senator from Alabama. We go to this every year together. This time, Rachel will be amused. We sat with Bernie Sanders. It was quite the group.
It was tripartisan.
But I will tell you that he stood and cheered when we talked about people having the right to vote, that is so fundamental to our system, and we have to remember that, and that's why I think we really might now have that possibility of moving forward on that bill.
Senator Chris Hayes here. You just mentioned the breakthrough on the Farm Bill, which has been kind of the biggest symbol of the inability of this Congress to get anything done. This is a kind of pro forma thing you guys usually can get done. There's a lot of criticism of the cuts to food stamps that even came through the compromise bill. It's looking like about $8 billion over the budget window. My sense is you support the bill. What's your response to those who say that's too much and makes no sense to be cutting this program at this time?
Well, Chris, I think you're going to see strong Democrat support for the bill because of the fact that the House is looking at $40 billion in cuts. The Senate had $4 billion, and the compromise was really based on a very specific provision that affects only 16 states, and it's how they leverage their heating money for food stamp money, and it doesn't affect most of the people in this country in any way. I can tell you my state isn't affected at all in terms of food stamp money, and those states are going to make up for it some way. So while you're right, it's not everything that the nutrition advocates wanted. It is a lot better than what those House Republicans were talking about, and that's why you're not going to see major opposition from nutrition groups and advocates for the poor, because of the fact that out of this we get a 5-year farm bill where we're not going to get a tax on poor people and a tax on food stamps every single year. The amount will be set.
Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, thank you for being with us tonight. It's always a real pleasure to have you here.
It's great to be on, Rachel.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, we've got much more of MSNBC's coverage of the State of the Union ahead, including the great John Lewis, the legendary Congressman John Lewis, civil rights icon, whose leadership on the Voting Rights Act is not just current, but goes back to the very inception of that bill. He is a major part of the reason why the Voting Rights Act existed in the first place, and he's going to be joining us live. Stay with us.
Let's make this a year of action. That's what most Americans want. For all of us in this chamber to focus on their lives, their hopes, their aspirations. What I believe unites the people of this nation, regardless of race or region or party, young or old, rich or poor, is the simple, profound belief in opportunity for all. The notion that if you work hard and take responsibility, you can get ahead in America.
Presented by the new Windows. One experience for everything in your life.
Start with a new Surface, complete with Office, then add a keyboard. Try the 2-in-1 that's both a laptop and a tablet. Or the lightweight all-in-one you can even take with you. There's the phone with 41 megapixels and reinvented zoom. and the 8-inch Windows tablet with up to 14 hours of battery life. All of these amazing devices come with the same incredible experience. That's the new Windows. One experience on every device for everything in your life.
What is Congress afraid of? 9 out of 10 Americans support background checks. They make it harder for criminals and the mentally ill to get guns. Congress is afraid of the gun lobby. Tell Washington it's too dangerous to wait.
It's a sucker punch to America's heartland. The deeper we dig into the Keystone XL pipeline, the closer we get to the truth. China's become one of the biggest players in Canadian oil. Chinese government-backed interests have invested $30 billion in Canadian tar sands development, and China just bought one of Canada's largest producers. They're counting on the U.S. to approve TransCanada's pipeline to ship oil through America's heartland and out to foreign countries like theirs. TransCanada's ads say the oil will help make America energy independent. But under oath, TransCanada won't commit to selling us one single barrel. The oil lobbyists and politicians, they take Americans for suckers. Keystone means more profit for investors like China, more power for their economy, and more carbon pollution for the world. Keystone's a sucker's deal for America. Just say no to Keystone.
We had a CRV, and then we had the Pilot. You got more with the Ford Escape. I'm glad we got the Escape and we switched.
Yay! I definitely like the Ford better. It's that foot-activated liftgate.
And I don't have to do all this. Yeah, I'm filling up a lot less than I did with my Honda. Awesome!
Make the switch to the Ford Escape for just $199 a month. See your Tri-State Ford dealer today.
Last year, part of the Voting Rights Act was weakened, but conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats are working together to strengthen it. And the bipartisan commission I appointed, chaired by my campaign lawyer and Governor Romney's campaign lawyer, came together and have offered reforms so that no one has to wait more than a half hour to vote. Let's support these efforts. It should be the power of our vote, not the size of our bank accounts, that drives our democracy.
Well, I'll say it again tonight. It was a wonderfully developed and masterfully delivered centrist, center-right, or actually center-left set of issues he was campaigning on tonight for the presidency. But I also thought it had a center-right coloration, very nationalistic, very American-sounding, lots of talk about opportunity, nothing about entitlement. I thought it was very well delivered tonight, not to rile up his enemies, but to rile up his troops. Anyway, one of his troops, in fact, a lot longer than Obama. This guy's been around. U.S. Congressman John Lewis of Georgia joins us right now. Congressman, you know, I thought he made a point. Maybe you disagree. I think he made a point not to poke the eye of the right wing and the rights priebusses and the 36 states that are trying to screw the African-American voter right now by just saying we ought to be together on this, when in fact the adversarial nature of the Republican Party toward minority voters has been manifest now for years, and he didn't really take it out on the Republicans for being that way.
Well, I think the president tonight had the right tone as he spoke about doing something about political participation. He said, in effect, that we're going to do what we do in a bipartisan fashion. As we were walking out tonight, and I had a chance to say hello to him, and he said, John, how is the bipartisan voter registration of voting bill is coming together? I said, Mr. President, we're working on it, and we're going to pass it. And I truly believe that. Democrats and Republicans together We're going to fix it, and we will not see a repeat of what we've seen in the recent past.
How do you stop states like Pennsylvania and other states from trying to increase or raise up the obstacle to vote?
Well, the new proposal would cover all 50 states if they have violation of the new act. And that's what we got to do it. Make it universal, make it simple, make it convenient for all of our citizens. It doesn't matter whether you live in Georgia, Alabama, or Mississippi, or in Pennsylvania, or Arizona. The right to vote must be protected.
Congressman, I think that one of the things that you must be given credit for is that you have worked with Mr. Sensenbrenner to come with a bill that would be bipartisan. And you've said it's not a perfect bill. We have to have statewide violations. But it really did something. We all had the big march last year that you helped lead, and you've been a general since '65 on the front line. And the president's tone tonight helped complement that. Do you think it will help you get enough Republican votes to bring this all the way through and expand it to where some of those that are left out, like voter ID and others, can possibly be included as we move down the road?
Well, this is a significant step. As I said before, it is not a perfect bill. It is a good bill. But this is what we were able to do. We had to compromise. We had to work together, both Democrats and Republicans. They did it in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. They did it in 1964, 50 years ago, with the Civil Rights Act. We're not finished. We have work to do.
Well, you've begun it. I think it's important. Do you think it was critical, though, that the president himself addressed that tonight and laid it out in front of the nation as the principles of what democracy is all about?
Well, I think it was important for the president to say what he said tonight. In all, I think it was a great speech, an extraordinary speech with a lot of passion, with hope. I just think he became what I call a headlight and not a tail light tonight.
What do you think it was, Mr. Lewis, that brought the president back to the language and the excitement that he showed when he first spoke to the Democratic Convention back in 2004? He seemed to get back into that groove again tonight that he's been distracted from by a lot of events, obviously.
Well, this is his second term, and I think it's this feeling that I got to give it all I have. And he's ready, starting tomorrow, to get on the road and take it to the American people. And I like what he said tonight. If you don't act, if you fail to act, I will act. I will use the pen, I will use my voice, I will use everything that I have. And I like that. I love that. He is a fighter. He's a warrior.
And so are you, sir. Thank you so much. Congressman John Lewis of Georgia. Congressman, thank you so much. We have Donna Edwards now of Maryland joining. She's a member of the Progressive Caucus. Congressman, it's always great to have you on. And I was thinking, spark. That's what I saw tonight. Spark, and I heard it in the president. I missed it, like a lot of us, I'll say it. I've missed it lately. And then it came back to that grain of who he is. I grew up this way. Boehner grew up this way. We didn't get all the breaks. I didn't have a father around. He had a barkeep, regular middle-class dad. And yet here we are. And yet I'm going to make sure that pathway's open for other people to come that route. Not everybody's going to go to Ivy League schools, but I'm going to make sure there's training programs for the kid who comes out of a community college. I'm going to make sure there's a training program that meets the job he or she can get. I thought there was a lot of gritty Americanism in the speech tonight. Your thoughts?
Well, Chris, you're really right about that. And I think for me as a woman, what really stuck home was his call for equal pay for equal work. That's about fairness. It was a call to raise the minimum wage. That's about, raising the wage base in this country so that you don't have to ask for a handout, but you can use your own wages to take care of yourself and your family. And for me, the president struck exactly the right chord that we need to hear, recognizing that we've come out of this horribleness of the last 5 years of an economy that has really taken us all through the loop, but that we're looking ahead. And so it was very optimistic. And it was also, saying we're going to embrace the opportunity we have. And I'm going to do what I need to do as president to do that. but the Congress has to do stuff too. And I can't wait till he gets on the road, because his first stop is in my district, and I'm looking forward to us taking that message all across the country.
Congresswoman Edwards, this is Rachel Maddow. I was just going to ask you about that. I was just looking at the president's post-State of the Union travel schedule, and he's going to Pittsburgh and Nashville and Milwaukee, and also Glenarden, Maryland, which is in your district. As far as I understand that, that's to highlight one particular employer who the president shouted out tonight, Costco, as a company that made a decision internally on its own terms to give its workers higher wages. We've seen a lot of Republicans in the House denouncing the president tonight as having been sort of kingly and imperial and demanding that he's going to act unilaterally. I wonder how you would contrast that with what he's asking businesses to voluntarily do, like that one he's going to be visiting in your district.
Well, I'm excited he's going to be visiting Costco, because Costco is a high-end employer, and we recognize that employers can do some things on their own, and the president will highlight that. It was shocking, actually, to see Republicans sitting on their hand when he called for the private sector to do on their own time, on their own dime, call for an increase in the minimum wage. And so I'm excited by what the president has said, because when an overwhelming majority of the American people believe that we need to raise the minimum wage, and Republicans are unwilling to do that, I think that says volumes to the country, and the president ought to do what he can as an executive. It's his authority, it's his ability to do that, and then maybe it pushes us in Congress to do what the American people want anyway.
Congressman, the hottest thing he said at the end of his speech was this promise that he will veto any effort to impose new sanctions on Iran in the middle of these efforts to try to avert a war there. Where are you on that one?
Well, I was one of the members who stood up and applauded the president, because I think that we have to focus like a laser beam on any prospect for diplomacy. Secretary Kerry has done this. The president has embraced this. And it's unbelievable that there would be people who don't want to move forward in a diplomatic way, in a peaceful way, to reduce the ability of Iran to develop a nuclear weapon and give peace a chance. It sounds old and trite, but give peace a chance, give diplomacy a chance. That's what the president has called for, and I thought it was a strong call and a signal of a veto threat if we send a sanctions bill that would undermine all the good work that's gone into place, not just by the United States, but by our allies as well.
I love hearing that. Thank you so much, U.S. Congresswoman Donna Edwards of Maryland. Well, I think this is going to be an interesting division tomorrow in the newspapers, how many people rallied to the president and those who have signed on to this measure to try to set their own foreign policy.
What was fascinating was you had this story kind of brewing in the background, right? So the president is doing this, a series of historic breakthroughs, right? The phone call, it hasn't happened in 30 years. We're actually having, all of a sudden, we're having face-to-face talks. Amazing, right? And this revolt starts brewing in the Senate. I mean, absolutely a revolt, right? I mean, you have Democratic senators whipping to pass a bill that the president himself...
Is this a Logan Act violation? I don't know. Are they setting their own
foreign policy? The White House is saying, don't do this, don't do this. Their argument is, we want to give you more leverage, Mr. President. The president's saying, do not give me the leverage. You're not helping. And what happened was, it was quietly killed. It was killed by Harry Reid. I think the air came out of it a little bit. The reporting I've read on the Hill...
It was tasered.
It was tasered. It was tasered. But there really looked like a moment when they were going to call the president's bluff and pass this thing. There was even talk about, 61, 62 votes. And whatever happened behind closed doors, it doesn't seem to me... It seems to me like the momentum on that has stalled.
It was fast. I mean, I am a person who believes in congressional interference with foreign policy in matters of war and peace. I want an activist Congress on that subject. I think that Congress has ceded too much power to the president on issues like that. However, on this one...
It's like, now you're going to do it?
There was no... On this one, the argument was that we're trying to strengthen the president's hand. That was not at all what they were trying to do. What the Congress was actually doing, had they passed that sanctions bill, what the Iranian foreign minister said was, I don't care if the president vetoes it. If Congress passes this, we're out. The deal is over. There will be no diplomatic solution. So what does that leave? Okay, a military solution. I mean,
I'm with you, by the way, when Congress is more dovish than the president. When Congress is more hawkish than the president, I'm with the president.
I want there to be more debate, even when
policy
the debate is
trumps procedure with me. Anyway,
I'm with you on that, Chris. When the Congress is more dovish. But no, I think clearly the Congress went out there and they began to hear the public reaction. And I think when the Iranians took that position, they got caught out there. which is also why I give the president credit for saying it tonight, going straight at it and saying, I will veto it. He didn't duck it. He didn't in any way try to fluff over it. He said, let me be real clear, I will veto it. And that was a shot also at some of the hawkish members of his party that all of a sudden turned around into, oh no, we were just giving you leverage by trying to embarrass
that you don't want,
right.
that's going to
Thank
take
you
away
for
all of
nothing.
your leverage.
You know.
Joining us now is Arizona Congressman Raul Grijalva, who's a Democrat. He's the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus in Congress. He's also a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Congressman Grijalva, thanks very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate it.
I want to ask you about what the president said he was going to do by executive order. You personally and the Progressive Caucus have been pushing the president to act on his own terms on the minimum wage, and the way he can do that is with people who work for federal contractors. When the president made that decision tonight, they telegraphed it ahead of the speech. Republicans were very angry about it. I have to expect that you're very happy with that decision.
Oh, we're extremely happy, and happy because it's an important precedent, Rachel. It says to all of America that the president is going to take a leadership role. While Congress does nothing about the minimum wage, the president is exerting leadership, and in an area in which he has executive control, he will deal with the working conditions and the salaries of those employees working for federal contractors. I thought it was significant. It adds momentum to the issue of income inequality, wage disparity, and the raising the minimum wage. I thought it was a very, very important and powerful statement that he made.
On the issue of immigration, you have been a very strong and aggressive advocate on the issue of immigration reform. Obviously, the president spoke in favor of that tonight, made an economic case for why it was necessary, but did not punch hard on the issue, did not push congressional Republicans in the ways that he has previously very hard on this issue. Do you think that was strategic to try to give the Republicans some room to find a way to say yes?
If the intent was to be strategic, I hope it works. But in the past, this Congress, and particularly the House of Representatives, has not wanted to do anything about comprehensive immigration reform. We're waiting for Boehner to announce what his real principles are going to be with regards to what Republicans will do around the issue of immigration reform. You know, the president was strong. He spoke directly to the American people, went over Congress's head to deal with issues of voter registration, minimum wage, Iran and diplomacy, climate change, and the issue of using the Antiquities Act to preserve and conserve important areas. Very strong, saying this office will continue to protect and work with the American people and make it better. On the issue of immigration, you didn't have that authoritative point saying this administration will look at ways to relieve and to try to better and mitigate the issues around immigration reform as a way also to prod Congress to do something. That specificity would have been welcomed.
Thank you, Congressman Raul Grijalva. It's a very important and pointed strategic analysis there. Thank you, sir. Appreciate having you here.
Thank you very much.
MSNBC's live coverage of the State of the Union will return right after this. Stay with us.
So what connects the dots between new jobs and cleaner air, a manufacturing renaissance, and energy security? American natural gas. Fact is, America is now the world's #1 natural gas producer, thanks to safe, proven hydraulic fracturing technology, making clean-burning domestic natural gas the fuel of choice. From advanced technology to a re-energized American economy, natural gas connects them all. Log on to learn more.
What's an idea without the capital to make it happen? Without the thinking that makes it real? What's a vision without the expertise to execute it? And the financing to make it grow? Whatever your goal, it can change more than your business. It can change the future. That's why at Barclays, our ambition is to always realize yours.
It says here that a woman's sex drive increases at the age of 80.
Helps reduce the risk of heart disease.
Keep heart healthy. Live long. Eat the 100% goodness of post-shredded wheat. Doctors recommend it.
You are a business pro, seeker of the sublime. You can separate runway ridiculousness from fashion that flies off the shelves. And you rent from National. Because only National lets you choose any car in the aisle and go. And only National is ranked highest in car rental customer satisfaction by J.D. Power.
Ooh, I like your style.
So do we, Business Pro. So do we. Go National. Go like a pro.
Dentures are very different to real teeth. They're about 10 times softer and may have surface pores where bacteria can multiply. Polident kills 99.99% of odor-causing bacteria and helps dissolve stains. That's why I recommend Polident.
Cleaner, fresher, brighter every day.
Let me tell you a story about two typical American couples. There's John and Joan who could use some financial help, but they're worried and have some misconceptions about reverse mortgages. Like they might not qualify if they have an existing mortgage and that it could mean giving up their home. But take Sandy and Greg. They're just like John and Joan, but they called AAG and learned that a reverse mortgage was government insured, tax-free, and that they'd always retain complete ownership of their home. They also learned that most people use a reverse mortgage to eliminate their existing monthly mortgage payments, and that AAG is America's trusted reverse mortgage lender with a 93% customer satisfaction rate. So join Sandy, Greg, and 500,000 other Americans.
Call 1-800-660-8341 now to receive a new free information kit, including a reverse mortgage guide and DVD, personal stories from people like you, and a brand new family guide for children and loved ones, all absolutely free with no obligation. Call 1-800-660-8341 today. Free.
What I offer tonight is a set of concrete, practical proposals to speed up growth, strengthen the middle class, and build new ladders of opportunity into the middle class. Some require congressional action, and I'm eager to work with all of you. But America does not stand still, and neither will I. So wherever and whenever I can take steps without legislation to expand opportunity for more American families, that's what I'm going to do.
President Obama in his fifth State of the Union address tonight. The emotional crescendo of the speech came at the very end of the address when President Obama introduced Sergeant First Class Corey Remsburg, an Army Ranger, who he had met before Sergeant Remsburg had been wounded. He'd met him at a D-Day commemoration on Omaha Beach. Shortly thereafter, on his 10th deployment, Sergeant Remsburg was grievously wounded, and President Obama told the story of his recovery tonight. He said, like the Army he loves, like the America he serves, Sergeant First Class Corey Remsburg never gives up, and he does not quit. That was punctuated with a standing ovation that went on for more than a minute and 40 seconds. It was absolutely the emotional high point of the address tonight. There was not a single person in the room who was not standing up, at which point Congressman Tim Huelskamp, Republican congressman from Kansas, tweeted, "Obama politicizes the military to end his speech. Totally expected, Mr. President." Joining us now is Congressman Tim Huelskamp of Kansas. Congressman, thank you very much for being with us. I have to ask you if that was tongue-in-cheek. Do you really believe that was politicizing the military?
We actually invited our own veteran, one that served bravely as well, some tremendous heroes out there, and did receive word from the administration when we put a press release out that perhaps we were politicizing that fact. But very brave man, a lot of brave heroes, and it's very interesting because the president very clearly ran against the military. He continues to highlight them when it helps politically. But at the end of the day, more of the same in this speech, Rachel. Things are not going well.
How did the president run against the military?
Well, it's pretty clear. He wanted to bring the troops home. He wants to close Gitmo. He wants to do all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the focus on the speech should have been, how are things working out? And right now, they're not working out well.
Bringing the troops home your definition of being against the military?
No, what the president talked about when he first ran obviously is very different. You know, whether it's his NSA issue, whether it's the issue of how much the president should have in terms of authority. I mean, he ran against Bush on all these things, Rachel. It's very clear. And all of a sudden, he's all for presidential power now. He's all for the NSA now. He's all for the military now during a speech. But at the end of the day, his policies are failing, and that's why we have 24 million Americans still looking for a full-time job.
Congressman Hulskamp, I still don't understand how he ran against the military. I still don't understand if you mean he was politicizing the military by praising that sergeant. I do have to ask you about the thing that you tweeted immediately thereafter. 3 minutes later, you said, was there a diplomat in Benghazi that gave his life for his country, Mr. President? Are you denying that an American diplomat died in Benghazi?
Do you know what happened in Benghazi? The president refuses to come clean. Your Hillary Clinton refuses to come clean. They won't tell us what happened. And a diplomat died. We believe the initial evidence still is because the president or somebody in the White House refused to provide support to defend that diplomat and our Marines on the ground. That's irreprehensible. I will not accept no answer from that, and that's what we're talking about. We need answers on all kinds of things, Rachel.
Regardless of whether it's irreprehensible, I mean, are you questioning whether or not Ambassador Stevens gave his life for his country? Was there a diplomat in Benghazi that gave his life for his country?
Rachel, we're looking for answers. You know this president and Hillary Clinton are hiding the truth on Benghazi. We're just looking for them to come forward, let those folks testify that we're on the ground. That's the facts of the matter. We're still looking forward to that, and that's a congressional responsibility. It's also a responsibility of Hillary Clinton. You know, just a few months ago, she said, what difference does it make? 2 days ago, she said it was the biggest regret of her life, the failure in Benghazi. So we're looking for some answers there because that should not happen again. The Republicans have passed bills. We put stuff in the budget that would help protect our embassies and diplomats like those who perished in Benghazi.
Did you vote for the spending bill that just cut the security funding for American diplomatic facilities abroad? There was a significant cut to those diplomatic facilities in the last spending bill. Did you vote for that? Did you support that?
No, I did not vote for that bill.
Did you vote for the cut to diplomatic security facilities and their security before the Benghazi incident?
No, we had passed additional security measures as requested by the administration. But don't forget, the facts of the matter is Hillary Clinton did not request security enhancements. And we do believe that this administration let our troops down there and let this diplomat down. We need more answers there. We need answers about a lot of things. This administration promised to be the most transparent in history, Rachel, and I think if you would stop being a cheerleader and be a journalist, you'd recognize we're not getting those answers.
Did you just call me a cheerleader?
I don't know. Maybe you have that history. I'm saying look at the facts of the matter.
Hold on.
I'm saying you're a cheerleader for the administration.
Okay, so I'm a cheerleader?
You're not being a journalist when you're not willing to look at the facts. If it was Bush, you would be jumping and screaming.
You're amazing.
But because it's Hillary Clinton, you don't want the answers, Rachel. Face the facts. We don't
when you said
know the answers
tonight,
there.
Release of Obama's speech reads like dictates from a king. #lawless. Imperium. Whenever and wherever I can, I will act without constraints. Lawless. The new imperial presidency, Obama will do everything without legislation to advance his radical agenda. Yes, you deleted Article 1. When you tweeted that the president is hail to the king, Obama to unleash the imperial presidency, are you making the case that this president is acting in an unlawful manner by proposing the things he proposed in his State of the Union address?
The president acted in numerous unlawful manners, particularly in his willingness to suspend parts of Obamacare. He went out and said big businesses, for example, don't have to live with Obamacare. I think that's lawlessness. I don't think he has that authority. I do not think he had authority to make recess appointments. I think the court's going to agree with me.
Sir, I'm just
you
trying
have
to
to
focus
agree
on the
with
case
me.
that you're making, which is that his speech says that he is a king.
The speech makes no law. The president makes good speeches.
The release of the speech reads like dictates from a king.
It really
#lawless.
does.
What did he say in the speech that was lawless tonight?
14 different points in where the president said, I don't like the American people who they elect. That's what the president was saying. He said, I don't like Congress. I don't like the American people that sent these people up here. And so he listed 14 different dictates, executive orders. Yes, that he was going to take.
Lawless?
An executive action without authority is lawlessness.
Executive
he did not
orders
have the
by
authority.
presidents are lawless?
If there is no authority. Under Obamacare, he decided, Rachel, you know this,
that's true.
he
if
recited,
there is no authority, then it has no authority.
He has no authority to suspend Obamacare, and that's what this president has done. I think that's lawlessness.
Your tweet stream tonight and your arguments here are from two totally different universes.
It's the universe of reality, Rachel, the universe of outside this beltway. The president's speech fell flat out in the real world. In Washington, there's still a Twitter, but recognize Americans want some answers. They want some solutions. The economy's flatlined. 6.5 million more Americans are in poverty since this president took office, and he wants to preach about income equality that he created. That's a failure. And that's all we're asking, Mr. President. Be truthful that your solutions have not worked.
Congressman Tim Huelskamp of Kansas. I got to admit, I've always enjoyed you on television with other people. I found you spectacularly disingenuous in explaining your own words tonight. But I hope you'd come on my show and we could have this conversation one-on-one sometime soon.
We'd love to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow.
I love that sweet goodbye. You know what he missed?
It was like Newsmax Mad Libs.
What I know is it was just interesting that he was basically criticizing the commander-in-chief. If he was familiar with the Constitution, you should remember, it's not the military separate. He's the commander-in-chief, the President of the United States. And he's paying tribute to an injured, a wounded soldier who's really paid a price for his service, and with his service. And there's something wrong with that? And also, by the way, the nonpartisan or bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee has completely verified everything that Susan Rice said. Every point, it was caused by a copycat attack coming from Cairo over to Benghazi, which was itself stimulated by all the evidence they have by that crazy movie guy making a movie out in Los Angeles. And the fact that the use of the term extremists rather than terrorists came from the CIA, and the non-reference to the Al-Qaeda was a decision by the sainted General Petraeus at the CIA. Everything was done right.
Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and George Bush had more executive orders than President Obama. So if he's being imperial, I guess they were imperial with steroids.
To zoom out for a moment, right? I mean, that was it. That's it right there. American politics in a little nutshell. I come before you today to talk about my power as President of the United States to do crazy imperial things like convene CEOs to talk about training at community college. And what is the response? Why are you covering up in Benghazi? That's it. That's the whole last 5 years of politics. The president comes out, everyone's talking about, oh, it's going to be executive orders this and executive orders that. He's talking about like getting people together at photo ops so we could talk about training some people. It's like this incredibly incremental, 500,000 people are going to get a raise. And what's the response? What does Tim Huelskamp hear? He hears Caesar is riding in to destroy the American Republic and cover up Benghazi.
That's the thing that's difficult for me is like, do you talk to him point by point, because he says this speech shows that the president is an imperial president. He's a king. He's acting lawlessly. He's basing that on the speech. Okay, so what's lawless? A thing that I read in the comment section of a blog 3 weeks ago about a conspiracy theory that Louis Gohmert screamed to me about.
By the way, Ted Cruz said it was lawless before he began to speak tonight.
I thought,
everything.
I thought nutshell was about the right word to describe.
Okay, let's hear another Republican voice here. We have a ranking member of the leadership now, the Deputy Majority Whip of the United States House of Representatives, Oklahoma Congressman Tom Cole. I don't know. You seem to be a pretty reasonable fellow over the years watching you, Congressman. Was the president being a lawless bandito tonight? I didn't catch that. I thought he was really kind of avoiding poking the Republican side in the eye. I thought he really tried to avoid that tonight. He made his point. He rallied his troops without being. I didn't think he was at all a stinger going after the other side. In my view. What was yours?
Well, actually, I don't think he was particularly confrontational tonight. I actually think. Look, the president always gives a great speech, no doubt about it. And I agree with Rachel. The end was one of the more inspiring moments that I've experienced on the floor. And it was genuinely bipartisan. Look, we all appreciate the sacrifices been made on our behalf. So that was perfectly appropriate. I didn't see a lot new in the speech, unfortunately, from the president. And what I guess I'm looking for is a president that will engage with Congress. We've had presidents before that did that in a bipartisan fashion. Ronald Reagan did, Bill Clinton did, and we're pretty successful. I don't think that's been a strong point for this president, but we'll see what he does going forward.
Joe Scarborough said on his show, I guess a couple weeks ago, it really grabbed me because he did serve for a number of years in Congress. He said he hated debates over minimum wage. He thought as a Republican it was always tough to stand there and say, I'm against a minimum wage hike for working people. How about you? Do you find it something you're comfortable opposing or supporting, or where are you?
No, look, a lot depends on the issue itself and whether you're trying to politicize it. Senator Lott told me once that he offered President Clinton a minimum wage with an inflation escalator, and the president chose for whatever reason not to do that. If you look at it currently, a lot of states and individual municipalities are doing exactly what the president suggested, is acting on their own. To me, personally, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of variety in America, and whether you want to raise the unemployment rate in a place with 9% unemployment versus 5.5, or with different cost of living, to me that should be largely a local decision, and that's what seems to be happening. So I don't put a lot of stock in raising the federal minimum wage. I think it's a pretty blunt instrument.
There you go with a nay vote, though. Congressman, thank you for coming on today. Congressman Tom Cole, a very interesting fella from Oklahoma.
Well, when he just said the history of bipartisanship, look, that guy was John Boehner's right-hand man in going to war over the shutdown, in watching the Tim Huelskamps of the world, who of course was a signatory to the letter to John Boehner asking him to shut down the government over Obamacare. He was sitting there in every meeting with the House leadership trying to avoid it and then turning the ship around saying, okay, I guess we're doing it, fellas. He knows full well, he knows better than anyone, that calling Obama, bad at bipartisanship, he understands precisely what he's working with, right? I mean, it is just not possible with this House Republican caucus to find any middle ground. It is just not.
Well,
That's
it is
just
funny,
a fact
you guys
of
who
life.
close the government as a policy or as a practice, referring to the other side as lawless. You would think that would fall back.
But if you can ask, you can call them lawless if you can say if someone just raises the question to you about what in the speech was lawless, you become a cheerleader. I mean, when you're dealing with logic like that.
Just the way I look, people think I'm a cheerleader.
I mean,
he had that weapon. He waited for 5 minutes to say that.
Steve, let me ask
he
you.
thought about it 5 minutes before.
George W. Bush signed federal minimum wage increases into law. Do Republicans see that as something that either hurt the country or hurt him, or do Republicans look back on that with regret?
Look, I think it's a fact that the purchasing power of the minimum wage today is, in fact, 20% of what it was when Ronald Reagan was president. And part of the political genius of Bill Clinton, for example, was co-opting so many issues that were winning Republican issues. And I don't understand just a matter of political strategy. Because I don't think there's a lot of deleterious effects economically from raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. This is a political matter, though. It's a political matter. Why are we breaking our pick on this issue?
Yeah, right.
Now, I think the issues of income inequality, while they're real, I think are